phrase hair metal makes it sound like you're referring to a girder that has a Fabio wig on it. It's really quite ridiculous. However, it's synonymous or oftentimes interloped with glam metal or sleaze metal or glam rock or hard rock or blah 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 blah. It's another one of those things that's similar to today where pop punk has about 27 different iterations that all sound the same. But either way, this was music that dominated the latter portion of the 1980s. You know, tag teaming up with thrash metal, these were two of the heaviest types of music that was getting mainstream exposure on the planet, and it was one that led to big sales for these groups. And it caused them to go into the 1990s with momentum that was eventually stymied, and no, it wasn't just because of grunge. But here it is in 2016, and a lot of these bands are still going out on tour, and some people are wondering why. Yes, there's still a lot of hatred that brews that really started in the 1980s, but now has somehow transitioned into newer fans. Most of them feeling that most of these bands and their associated members, who still do get ample press time in the heavy metal press, should just go to the closest warm area and find a retirement home and learn how to play shuffleboard. So let's discover some of the reasons why this is. Here are 5 reasons why people hated hair metal and why they still do today. Number 5, it's mainstream garbage. Now, in 1980, or in the 1980s, should I say, bands such as Motley Crue and Poison coming over the radio was something that was rather commonplace. These were groups that were starting their careers and were moving mountains. They were getting a lot of fans, not to mention this was seen as a lighter form of the thrash metal that was already starting to take over earlier in the decade. Really, the two hands shook, but this, stick with me here. These are bands that were able to really also apply to many people based around some real-world, relativity. These are songs that talked about being unlucky in love, being lucky in love, or just getting lucky. 3 things that in the 1980s just about everybody and their mother knew about. This being mainstream garbage is an argument that I hear today based around the fact that 30 years later, these songs can still be heard on the radio. Of course, everybody has heard Every Rose Has Its Thorn at least once. I know that's not from the 1980s. Shut up. This is instead something where they feel that the overexposure is done. It is time for new music to take over. I guess they've never listened to an oldie station in their life. Number 4, it isn't metal. Once again, this argument comes up, and once again, this is the only response that anybody with half a brain can actually have. But I can kind of understand the argument. Even though this has a very heavy metallic texture to it, it does borrow a lot more from the old glam and sleaze rock from the late 1970s in the UK, as well as from the hard rock or arena rock that you saw basically worldwide throughout the 1970s, as opposed to being a full-blown heavy metal explosion. Although the boys in Motley Crue, with their first couple of albums, would no doubt debate that at a pretty high and hefty level. This was something that sort of combined the best of both worlds. It combined arena rock with the sleaze, the glitz, the glamour, and the high-class, highbrow attitude. And by highbrow, I mean they want to fucking kill or do everything. They were able to bring this together in order to cause something that sort of reflected the party atmosphere that the 80s was sort of offering many people, especially in the United States of America, because cocaine is a great drug and everybody should try it. No, you shouldn't. However, based around this, there has of course been the long-term argument by metal fans that, like some things of the more extreme variety, that this isn't metal whatsoever. It's instead one that should just be deemed the rock designation as opposed to metal. And in fact, these are some of the bands that oftentimes will get questioned whenever it comes to the idea of, is it metal or is it rock? Is there really one pure question or one pure answer for that question? No, not really. Is there a reason for that? Yeah, I kind of just like watching a bunch of you sweat over it. It's funny whenever you guys feel that this is all of that important, when in reality you should just enjoy the music. Number 3, it's metal for women. It's metal for women, said by somebody who obviously hasn't touched very many of them. Heavy metal for women, something that you would expect, the whole groupie idea and the fact that most fantasies about being in a band involve having groupies, my brain just exploded. It's heavy metal for women. Why? Because it was something that in the 1980s that many female fans were able to sort of get behind. Now, in these days, in 2016, women are just like men. We like everything, There are some women that love extreme metal, there are some metal that like pop music, there are some men that like pop music, and some men that like extreme metal. And really, that's sort of the way it always was. However, the reason why this argument is prominent is because it was seen very aptly that there was a very large female fan base for the glam rock or the glam metal, the hair metal, the sleaze metal. How many fucking names does this thing have? It's like pop punk today. They had a very large female designation to their fan base. And of course there is the historic stories about what some of the individuals have done behind the scenes, winky winky face. But this is instead something that should be accepted. It's something that has probably introduced many female fans that previously were maybe listening to Madonna into something a little bit harder edge, which may have introduced them to something even further in the heavy metal department, such as Metallica. It's really hard to tell. Really, this is something that should be embraced, as opposed to being seen as a big debate point. But surprisingly enough, whenever I was researching this task, it was something that always seemed to come up, and I never really understood that. Where's the problem? Number 2, the songs have aged poorly. This is more of a modern age reason that people hate, I guess, hair metal, is that the songs have aged poorly. We already spoke about the whole mainstream garbage aspect, but there are many that claim that 30 years later the songs simply do not hold up because they are not songs that feel as relevant. Well, no freaking dip, Sherlock. It's not as though whenever these songs were written in the late 1980s that they were thinking, well, you know what, I want to make sure that little Jimbo in 2016 can relate to this fucker. And in reality, if you listen to some of those songs, if you listen to Every Rose Has Its Thorn, if you listen to, half of the Motley Crue material, they are semi-relatable. And, Kickstart My Heart's all about cocaine. You can try cocaine. Maybe you won't feel like skydiving naked out of an airplane, but still, these are songs that are actually still pretty relevant to this day, considering they talk about an ageless topic. They talk about the concept of being in love. They talk about the concepts of being young or, doing things over excessively. They talk about heartbreak. This is something that still has relevance throughout any generation. It's the reason why in music you hear so many love songs, considering everybody that's under the sun, except for the chosen few, have experienced these things. And really, the fact that they wrote these different ideas, and maybe the only real argument that could be made is that the songs all sound similar, or there seems to be a very chosen aesthetic for it, which that's definitely agreed upon. It was a scene that was very highly driven by press and very highly driven and motivated by sales and the results that were really provided through the shows. But to say that these songs have aged poorly is kind of a weak argument. And really, if you want to say that it's aged poorly, why don't you try to attempt to find something that hasn't aged poorly in this department? Really, there's even some arguments out there that some of the most legendary thrash metal albums have started to really wane on their age period and started to sound exactly what they are, 30 to 35 years old. Why not just enjoy it for what it is? You still like Led Zeppelin and you consider that timeless. Personally, the hard rock aesthetic from the 1970s is one that needs a reboot, so I can kind of understand that, but at the same time, it's also older than the stuff that you're saying has aged poorly. What's your argument now? Are you saying that somehow Led Zeppelin and other bands from the 70s, or thrash metal, or anything else, whatever the counter-argument to this argument is Benjamin buttoning its way into youth? I don't get this. Number 1, the crowds are thin, why continue? This is the biggest reason that I have seen, and while you don't see this as much whenever you just actively search for this, it's one that you hear or see all the time, perhaps among commonplace people. A lot of people feel that since Poison and Motley Crue are not playing to as large of crowds that they were at one point in time, what's the point in continuing? Of course, Motley Crue is no longer active. However, there are other bands that are playing much smaller shows, whether they be, instead of arena shows, they're now playing at bars. I really think that a lot of the folks that feel this way have kind of missed the point of music in general. Really, if you have a message and you really enjoy playing music, you've had your time in the sun. It's not as though you've been playing for 37 people your whole entire life, and you just really enjoy the aesthetic of performing in front of people, and they like your music, then really what's the problem? What's the point? There's absolutely no problem with this. This is something that's pretty good. Because at least those couple of people, might not be 37,000, it might just be 370, at least they have an experience. They have something that they can talk about with their friends. Not to mention, it furthers their support for your product. Now, I know I use that demonized P word of product. That's essentially what your songs are as a musician. It is a product, but at the same time, it also has the opportunity to be very life-affirming. It has the opportunity to be extremely personal to you. It can be something that triggers memories. Really, music is something that has a power that we have never been able to fully put words to, and that's what makes it so unique. And that's the reason why these bands deciding to continue is honestly still a pretty cool idea. The only time that a band should ever really consider retirement is whenever their health is at risk, similar to what happened with Brian Johnson. But what's really neat about that situation is that somebody stepped forward and says that they can actually make a device that would allow Brian to continue touring later on after this whole gig with Axl Rose, and he wouldn't be at risk for total deafness. So there's always people out there that are going to want to see you continue to live your dream. And if you're only playing for 370 as opposed to 37,000, that's still 370 memories that you can still make. So I really don't understand why anybody would complain or say that a band should just hang it up based around the fact that their crowds get smaller. Consider that this is one of those, career choices where you're not necessarily always going to be blessed with the benefit of going out on top. It's not as though you can ascend to the CEO of the company and then leave the CEO all the time. Sometimes you only have a couple of years in the sun, and then all of a sudden the decline begins. Either that, or we have what's happening in the musical landscape today, where it is becoming a little bit harder to get those big numbers, considering there's still a bit of a recessionary economic period going on. Either way, 370 people is still a lot better than it just being one person. And really the one detractor that perhaps is spitting this venom in your face whenever you talk about these bands, well, maybe they should just go to a Justin Bieber Purpose concert and, get his period. Whatever. There you have it. 5 reasons why people hated hair metal back in the day and why they still hate them today. This is hatred that I really don't understand all of that much. A lot of people dislike or distance themselves from this genre because of perhaps the fact that it's a fringe line idea. It's a fringe line style of music, whether it be rock or metal, is kind of a confusing notion. This is still something that I find to have a lot of relevance to this day based on the impact that it did have in the latter portion of the 1980s. And it is also something where these groups, they're not all that bad. They're something that you should certainly check out. And they're pretty good bands for newcomers because it kind of helps them adjust a little bit to something a little bit heavier. And you can almost kind of 12-step your way into the heaviest portions of metal based off of that. I'm coverkillernation. You have a suggestion for the next genre that we should tackle in 5 things. Leave it in the comments below. And I'll talk to you guys later.